Welcome. I'm Dr. Janice Sandoval, co-curator of the new Lowrider exhibition at the Petersen Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. The exhibit's titled Best in Low, Lowrider Icons of the Street and Show. With this exhibition, we're really about teaching folks about what is lowrider customization by highlighting certain features that lowrider cars are known for, like upholstery, paint, engraving, and of course, hydraulics. A perfect example of a lowrider that sort of covers all the features that we want to cover in this exhibit is Final Score. So a very important aspect of this exhibition is highlighting important people that build lowrider cars. And here we have Final Score, built by Chris Rourke. It's won Lowrider of the Year 3 years in a row, 2015 to 2017, which is like the highlight of what every car wants to attain. We look at this car and it has the important features of paint, and you see paint underneath the hood as well as engraving. So when we sort of think about paint, it incorporates a lot of different graphics, candies and pearls, and then oftentimes lowriders also have murals that sort of teach people about who the owner is, and a lot of times owners choose certain themes to their cars when they build them. You also see engraving as well, and engraving on the engine wall, oftentimes even in the undercarriage underneath the car, and even in the trunk on the hydraulic. So this car kind of has all the four aspects that we're looking at in this exhibition. So when we think about lowrider cars, a lot of folks say that every car tells a story. Sometimes it's personal stories and it'll feature family members, other times religious images, and often you see La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Mexican Virgin Mary, or with Final Score is, as I mentioned, this car won Lowrider of the Year 3 years in a row, and oftentimes lowrider owners do a different transformation to their car each time. So in this car, you have images of like a graveyard with like a sort of a crypt keeper, and on the tombstone, it says perfect score. And so typically a car came out with like a different name or a different sort of theme. And with this car, Final Score, the new image of this 1958 Chevy Impala. So it's really important to sort of think about the images in the car as intimately connected to the car owners and the builders and the story that they want to tell through their cars. So 1937 Buick, the Black Crow. So we have one of the oldest lowriders in existence that belongs to the oldest lowrider car club in continued existence in LA, the Dukes, founded in 1962 by the Ruelas family. And what we have here is Fernando's car that he had in the early 60s. And what's great about the Dukes Car Club, it was a group of brothers that started when they were young, customizing go-karts. Their Uncle Tinker taught them how to customize, and eventually they each sort of had a specialty that they sort of honed in on, whether it be upholstery, paint, engine work, electrical work. And so the other side of lowriding is how there's well-known families on the lowrider scene that help set the standard of the culture. And the Ruelas families are one of the OGs, are often considered the godfathers of lowriding. So lowriding is birthed after post-World War II, when there was a boom in car culture activities and in customization. A lot of times post-World War II, there was a turnover in secondhand cars, and so working class youth and young folks could afford these cars. So here we have like a 1937 Buick that is very clean, right? Just low to the ground, nice paint job, nothing like a radical custom. And I think the other part is thinking about how the style of customization, like the low part to the lowrider, you needed the low because we had the high with the hot rod. So hot rodding really began in the 1930s when young men were using their cars to, again, express themselves, stand out. And hot rods are known for being raised off the ground, right, going fast. Lowriders, post-World War II, took it the opposite direction. It was low to the ground and about going slow. But like what I always say, you want people to look at your car because when people look at your car, they're looking at you and they're looking at your community. 1964 Chevy Impala, Gypsy Rose. One of the most historic lowriders that's well known around the globe is the Gypsy Rose, which is really sort of the pinnacle of a lowrider icon. It's a 1964 Chevy Impala, was built in the 1970s, and it really kind of hits all the notes again that we're covering in this exhibition. This car was a street car. Not only did it drive in Cruz Whittier Boulevard in the 1970s, but was also featured on Lowrider magazine. And when you sort of look at the car, not only is it covered in over 100 roses, but it has crushed velvet pink interior, chandelier, and I always like to say it sort of highlights like it's rolling art. And so how lowrider owners were using their car to not just tell a story, but make a mark on the boulevard, and also using their cars as an emblem of I exist. Here we are, look at my car, it's beautiful, it's art, and especially important for Chicanos in the 1970s when we were fighting for our civil rights during the Chicano movement. So the Gypsy Rose also made a pop cultural impact in the 1970s. It was on a TV show called Chico and the Man, and it most importantly is the only lowrider that is in the National Vehicle Registry of Historic Cars in the United States, and it was given that honor in 2017. If you notice lowrider cars, there's a plaque flying in the back of the cars, and that's really important to sort of build the community aspect. Imperial Car Clubs is the second oldest lowrider car club in continued existence. It was founded in 1965. Jesse Valadez, the owner of this car, was one of the founding members. And so I think what's really important also about lowriding as a culture is the community aspect, the social aspect. So sometimes you have 2-3 generations of a family in a lowrider car club. Oftentimes, car clubs started in certain communities, and so there were friends in the neighborhood. And so when we sort of think about lowriding, and when you talk to lowriders in particular, they talk about how lowriding is about family, it's about brotherhood, sisterhood, it's about pride and respect. And so having your plaque on your car also represents lowrider pride. 1958 Chevy Impala, Dead Presidents. So Chevys in particular are the model of cars that are favored by lowriders. And one of the questions to ask is why? You know, you ask anybody and they'll have a different answer. But for a lot of years, the 1963 and 1964 were considered like the models for people to own and customize. And they're kind of considered the iconic models of cars, the 63, 64. And today you'll see a lot of different Chevy cars from like the Bombs, the cars from the 1930s and 1950s, to the Chevy Impala. But recent years, probably the model that people are building and taking to shows, and it's considered sort of the pinnacle, is the 1958 Chevy Impala. One aspect of lowrider customization are lowrider families. The D'Albas are well known for building award-winning lowriders, and Albert D'Alba Jr. Painted this car for his father, and you can see sort of all the intricate paint job from the pinstriping to the metallic paint to the clear coat. But the other side is people don't know is the craftsmanship, and people are learning these skills in the shops. And this car is a perfect example where Albert D'Alba Jr. learned from his father, who's another award-winning lowrider builder, Albert D'Alba. 1963 Chevy Impala El Rey. So we looked at the 1958 Chevy Impala from Albert D'Alba Jr., and now here's El Rey, 1963 Chevy Impala award-winning lowrider of the year 3 years in a row from the father. I love it because of the color. It sort of reminds me of a Mexican sarape, but it has all the areas that we're featuring in this exhibit, from the paint to the hydraulics, to the engraving, to the upholstery. El Rey, the inspiration was the Mexican charro song by Vicente Fernandez, El Rey. And so another aspect of the cars are bringing in sort of a bit of our Mexican culture and our pride. And also, again, representing the family and the build and the customization, because oftentimes families work together on their lowrider cars. And so to me, El Rey is just sort of the pinnacle of, yes, the modern lowrider, and also, again, it's iconic. So one of the fun parts of this exhibit is being able to look at the undercarriage of the lowrider cars, which are also art that are fantastically painted. You see engraving, chrome work, and when you come to the museum, you're going to see a lot of mirrors underneath the car that just not only add shine, but El Rey is a perfect example of how even the undercarriage is art. (1953) Chevy truck, Kodos 53. As a Chicano studies professor for over 25 years, I argue that the lowrider car represents Chicanismo. What is Chicano? Chicano is Mexican-American identity that in the 1960s, the label Chicano became a way to not just embody our pride of being both Mexican and American, but the word Chicano also has roots to our indigenous past in Mexico, from the word Mexicano, which is the original sort of name of the Aztecs, the Mexicas. And so I'm always fascinated with how lowrider cars and their art also use indigenous imagery to make that link to our indigenous past. So when sort of thinking about some of the indigenous imagery that lowriders use in their artwork, we often see the Aztec calendar, images of indigenous warriors. And I think, again, that's that connection for Chicano identity, that our roots were in this homeland, that yes, our roots are also European from the Spanish, but also we are also Indian. And so it's interesting to see how the artwork on cars also make that connection. One of the things that we often see is the skulls, and Mexican skulls are very different than Halloween American skulls. The skull represents the connection between life and death, and we've learned a lot more about the meaning of Mexican skulls through Dia de los Muertos, where death is also a time of awakening, a time of celebration, and you often see that connection of life and death in a lot of indigenous artwork. And so when you sort of look at cars, again, as stories, it's interesting to think about how lowrider owners also continue to look back to our indigenous past and make those connections and use those messages to talk about the world that we're living in today. So I know there's so much to cover in this exhibition. Next time, we're going to focus more on engraving and hydraulics, but also looking at the spread of lowrider customization to things like bicycles, motorcycles, and even the spread of lowrider culture to other parts of the world, like Japan. Welcome to part 2, looking at the Best in Low exhibit at the Petersen Automotive Museum. I'm Dr. Denise Sandoval, co-curator of the exhibition, and I'm also professor of Chicana and Chicano Studies at Cal State Northridge. So in this exhibit, it was also important to sort of look at the lowrider aesthetics and customization being applied to other vehicles and objects outside of cars. And a perfect example are lowrider motorcycles, also known as V-Class. And then by the 1990s, in the lowrider community, you see it on lowrider bicycles. And eventually by the late 90s, early 2000s, you begin to see engraving on the cars. So this is lowrider tricycle, Emily's dream. And Jose Espinosa and his daughter Emily kind of created this vision of this trike, and it's won Trike of the Year at many sort of lowrider car shows. And I think it also looks at the way that fathers are even integrating their daughters with the lowrider bicycle scene. 2006 Harley-Davidson Road King, La Vida Loca. This 2006 Harley-Davidson Road King is made to cruise the boulevard, cruise the highway, cruise the road. And it also represents New Mexico. New Mexico is often considered the lowrider capital of the United States, self-proclaimed, I might add. But when you sort of look at the lowrider custom aesthetics, they'll use different paint styles, different type of customization. And what I want to pay attention to on this motorcycle are sort of the religious symbols that you often see on lowrider cars, but is very particular to New Mexico. And you have here La Virgen de Guadalupe, who's the Mexican Virgin Mary, who really represents the syncretism, or what I like to say, the blending of Spanish culture with the colonization in 1521 of Mexico, also with the indigenous culture. She's often considered sort of the patron saint of Mexico, and she represents sort of that mixture of Mexican identity. And it also speaks to the commitment that a lot of Chicanos and Latinos have to Catholicism. And what I love about it is you have angels by La Virgen de Guadalupe, but they're kind of cholo angels. And so it's really a mixture of sort of Mexican history, but also Chicano aesthetics as well, and sort of representing lowrider culture. You can notice that it's sitting really low on the pedestal. It can't really cruise the road like that. So what does it have? Hydraulics. So I think what's great is even hydraulics are also used in Vicla culture, motorcycle culture, to keep that low aesthetics, like at car shows or like here at the museum. But when it's on the road, they're gonna raise it. So before we take a deep dive into the world of hydraulics, let's spend some time talking about engraving. So engraving as a technique is something that comes over from Europe with Spain. Think about sort of engraving on like swords, on armory, on guns. And so when it comes to Mexico, you begin to see that on silversmithing, also leatherwork. And a perfect example is this beautiful 2006 Harley-Davidson Road King out of Texas called La Charra. La Charra means cowgirl. And Texas and their style is always over the top. They always say everything bigger in Texas, and this motorcycle is a perfect example of it. And so you see the engraving on the wheel. Every part of the motorcycle where it can have metal and chrome and gold is engraved. What I love is even the leather work, right? And when you think about sort of Mexican history with horses and what we call charro culture, a lot of like the horse saddles and all the leather work is also engraved. And so to me, this motorcycle sort of represents all these customization techniques that go back to our colonial world in the modern era. So in the exhibit, we have many examples of lowrider bicycles and kind of the radical customization and really the art that's being created through this bicycle custom culture. Here we have 2015 Azteca de Oro. And what I wanted to draw attention to is, again, continuation of the indigenous themes like we saw in the truck, Kodos 53. You have the Aztec calendar here on the front wheel. You also have sort of pyramids right here in chrome and gold chrome. And I think when we sort of think about again, why a lot of the Chicano lowriding scene is drawn to sort of the Aztec imagery, it represents the foundational roots of our Mexican identity. (1979) Lincoln Continental Mark V, Las Vegas. So in this exhibit, it was important that we sort of bring out some lowrider icons. And this is the Las Vegas car, a 1979 Lincoln. And it really represents the more radical customization of the lowriding world. It won Lowrider Car of the Year in 1994, 95. And if you look at it, it is completely done in homage to Las Vegas and casinos. The upholstery work, radical customs, the doors open up to sort of certain games in Vegas. You have card tables, you have roulette, and you also have beautiful murals done by the artist Mr. Cartoon. And so when you sort of think about what it means to not just only win at the shows. A lot of lowrider owners also want to have their car in the pages of Lowrider magazine and also on the cover of Lowrider magazine. So Lowrider magazine was started in 1977, and it was a way to not just celebrate cars, but also celebrate the Chicano community. And as you look at some of the covers featured on this wall, you see the way that Lowrider magazine not only created a space for customizers to keep up to date of the latest trends, but also to build community. So in thinking about lowrider aesthetics, we have to talk about the innovations of hydraulics. In 1958, California Vehicle Code stated that your car couldn't be lower than the bottom wheel portion. So that meant guys who had their cars low to the ground could receive tickets. So hydraulics in 1959 really introduced the idea that you could go from being illegal to legal at the street level. And the original hydraulics were surplus World War II aircraft parts. Think about the parts that lower and raise the wing flaps on an airplane. So Ron Aguirre was one of the first to put hydraulics on a car, and actually was like on a Corvette. So where hydraulics was an important innovation for raising and lowering your car to be street legal, the other way is thinking about how hydraulics added to performance, or like we've already talked about, using your car to be seen in the world and really making a mark at the boulevard and at the shows. And so when we sort of think about best and low, we're also talking about best and high. So hydraulics is not just about hopping at the boulevards or at the show, but also cruising the boulevard on its side. What we have here at the Petersen is Sandy Avila's 1984 Oldsmobile Cutlass called Simply Beautiful. And to me, this car represents where we are today, where women are having their own car shows, creating their own car clubs, and using the lowrider community to create empowerment for women and really represent sisterhood. 1966, Chevy Caprice, Game Killer. So with this exhibit, it was important to not just reflect the gender diversity and the women on the scene, but also the long multicultural history of lowriding, especially here in Los Angeles, where African Americans played a significant part in building the culture and also in regards to customization and aesthetics. This car that we have here is owned by Tina Blankenship Early, and she is known as the First Lady of Lowriding, the only woman right now that is in the Lowrider Hall of Fame. And so I think what's important with this exhibit is looking at the way how diversity is reflected, not just in the customization styles, but in the community and the way that people use their cars to tell their story. So Game Killer is a daily street car. And if you notice, there's an LS1 swap engine that gives the vehicle more power. And when we sort of think about that more power, it also adds that modern edge because the engine is from the late 90s, early 2000s. And that sort of innovation in lowriding is best exemplified to Japan and the way how they're adding sort of art and high performance as well as innovative techniques to their lowrider cars. The Japanese started getting interested in lowriding in the 1990s. And one of the main places was Lowrider magazine that was highlighting Japan in the 90s and even had their own magazine, Lowrider Japan. So the Japanese at first were just importing cars from LA that were fully customized. And over the years, a lot of them came to a lot of the shops here, learned the skills, and now they have their own cars, their own shops, and some of the top customizers on the scene. So over the last 20 years, the Japanese lowriders have their own shops and have developed high level of customization skills and innovation. And a perfect example of that is this car, a 1958 Chevy Impala by Rohan Izawa Art Design. And the special technique is sort of this 3D paint that looks like embossed, but it's actually engraved. So this car is fully engraved from actual metalwork and paint. And I have never seen another car like this on the scene here in California. And I think what it represents is how the Japanese customizers are continuing to level up the skill set and also inspiring the lowriders here in the US.